Okay, look. Your hired muscles arrived. Let's get moving.
Sorry about that. Torrin's a man of few words. Well, nice words. Tons of mean ones.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name, of course, is Cesar Chris, and today we are talking about Episode 3 of Living World Season 4, which is extremely exciting because a lot of us have been waiting for a new bunch of content to come to the game, and it has finally arrived, or rather it arrived a few days ago. I apologize for being a little bit late to talk about this. I'm actually getting home from a trip I took to Tokyo and Hong Kong. I got back a couple days ago and have now just been able to play myself. It seems like whenever I take a trip during the summer, it's inevitable that I miss the launch of one of the new content updates for Guild Wars 2. I don't know why I plan it out so much, but either way, as you can tell maybe from my voice, I'm a little bit tired as I'm dealing with jet lag. I've never traveled this far before. And because of that, I've very much felt the jet lag coming home. But it's been nice because when I've been up in the late evening, I've been able to play through some of this fun content. So needless to say, I've been enjoying myself playing the new episode. I hope you guys have as well. In this video, I will have footage of the new fractal. That's actually what I was really excited to try. Don't get me wrong, I'm excited for the new story as well as the new zone and of course the new mount. I just haven't had enough time to really finish either of those or get the mount. So because of that, I thought let's put some footage of the fractal in the background. And on top of that, I feel like the mount has really stolen a lot of the show here, with good reason, because I think that's a huge drop for a Living World episode. And because of that, though, there hasn't been a ton of coverage on the fractal or anything like that. I mean, a lot of people have really been jumping to the mount first. So I was like, let's just start with the fractal and see how things go. So because of that, you can be kind of safe that I don't have any spoilers for the living story or anything to do with the episode that way. Obviously, there'll be spoilers for the fractal as you're watching me go through it right now. But otherwise, I don't really know much about the episode. So don't worry. This is mostly going to be discussion about the fractal. So let's get into it. The fractal is very cool. I think it's actually one of my favorite designed fractals in terms of like aesthetics that they've launched in a really long time. There's a lot of elements that have gone to help this. Particularly, I feel like the sort of cave style and sort of temple underground look really brings a lot to make this feel like a traditional dungeon. For instance, if this had been like just a separate wing of one of the initial dungeons at launch of Guild Wars 2, I would have believed it, which is really cool. Because I find a lot of fractals, although very fun, their aesthetics do feel like they're kind of just chopped out of somewhere. This one, it feels like you're really entering the temple and then you find your way through it and you get to the very base of it where you close the fractal. And because of that, it definitely feels like a dungeon of sorts, like and I don't mean like a dungeon as in dungeons in this game necessarily. I mean like a solid dungeon with an entrance, an exit, and the path that you follow. I don't know. It really accomplished that feeling for me, and that was kind of nice. It's something I haven't had in a lot of fractals in a while. I think what also helped was the fact that there was sort of like little traps and little pieces of lore that you got throughout the fractal, which was really cool. The storytelling was quite good as well. I did enjoy the two characters that kind of led us through here and their sort of difference in giving you information. I felt the story was well given, however, it was very open. And as you'll see at the very end, there is a bit of dialogue that would lead us to believe that this story is not over. In terms of the actual story itself, I think mostly what we're doing here is giving information about the place, giving information about obviously who they are, what they're coming to do, and very small bits of information about the lore of the dwarves and who we're dealing with and what kind of evil lurks with inside this cave of sorts. So I think it was very well done. In terms of the aesthetics, like I said, I think it's excellent. I think the place looks very, very good. There are some issues where it's quite dark. However, the darkness does become a mechanic at places where you have to light up different ways to go. They have this sort of floor where you have to light different ways to get across it. And although very interesting and a new mechanic, I feel like people who are just running this fractal to try and get it done will have some, you know, annoyance with having to like spam this light button. I haven't also tested it enough to see if the path through the darkness is random each time or if it's very specific and people will eventually know exactly where to go, because that'll kind of take away some of the novelty and it'll just be like, oh, come on, let's hurry up, wait for this cooldown on this light skill to go so we can get to the next part quicker and quicker. So there's definitely some pros and cons to that, but it was cool to play with a few different mechanics. In the last boss fight, we'll get to that at the obviously near the end of the video, we play with the sort of floor that goes away again. And this was very hit and miss with a lot of people. The main fight I think of in the fractals that had this was the thermonuclear reactor, where you're fighting the anomaly and sort of some of the plates go away. The big thing in that fight that was very confusing though was that the floor was kind of transparent already. And that's something they actually went back and fixed in the later edition of that fractal. So the fact that in this fight we've started with a solid floor, and I think the disappearing floor is well played with, as we have our sort of extra action key to bring back the floor. I think it's done a lot better. I'm not a huge fan of the final fight. I felt like it went on for a long time just because we had to sort of reconstruct the floor and get back to him. I'm also doing this, I guess I should mention, on the lowest difficulty. So in terms of actual challenge, you know, it might be a lot more fun to do at high level. That being said, from what I understand, there is no hard mode associated with this fractal. So the replayability and actual endgame content given through the fractal is pretty low. And that's kind of what I want to focus on for a larger part of this video is, you know, how much did this fractal actually add? Because it's a really cool fractal, but I'm definitely of the opinion, and I've shared this a few times on this channel, that adding these fractals, specifically ones without a challenge mode, don't do a ton for longevity. A lot of people are just going to play this once, you know, see the story, think it's really cool that way, which it is, but then kind of forget about it unless it's a daily or something like that. And sure, the daily system is great, but it just, you know, it just comes down to grinding these things out for gold at the end, which is, it is fun. But what I initially thought the fractals were going to be a ever scaling, ever more challenging system that just keeps on asking more and more of yourself. And as we've seen with the cap sort of staying at 100, that really hasn't been what it's been. And even with the new Path of Fire expansion, they didn't increase that level cap of fractals. I always thought, you know, once we got to 100, we'd eventually go to 150 or 200, or like, you know, in blocks with expansions, they'd add, you know, another 50 fractal levels or something like that. And that's just not how the system's been played with yet. And I don't want to say I'm disappointed necessarily, but I haven't seen the full potential of the fractals. So I'm very excited to see if that's something that would change in the future. But as of now, especially with like these sort of non-challenge mode story fractals, except for dailies, I really don't see myself playing this content very much. And don't get me wrong, I definitely love more variety in my dailies. I think anything that increases variety is great. And especially this one is a nice length for a daily. It's not as crazy as some of the old fractals used to be, and it's not super, super short either. I think they've really found a good equation for making a good fractal, and I think that's been proven in like at least the last like 4 fractals they've made. I don't think they've made one that's like just terrible in a long time. Like these have been all really solid, story driven. New mechanics, I think, is really good in fractals. We see a lot of mechanics that they're sort of testing out. I think they use the fractals as a way to test some things out for instance content. that we eventually end up seeing in raids, that we eventually end up seeing in different parts of the game. But in terms of, continuous play, apart from farming these for gold, there's not a whole bunch of reasons to do fractal. And a lot of people at that point are like, that's fine. The whole point of them is to get the gold for me, and that's great. I just always saw them as sort of a endgame content of themselves, because when we're looking at them, yes, they gear you up in Ascended gear, which can be used for raids. It's great. But this agony system is very separate to the fractals themselves. And because of that, it really, really solidifies them as their own separate type of content that should be expanded with and should go on for a really long time. So I think the next big move they have to do is really look at how they can start adding more levels to the fractals and really make them get harder and harder and harder. I've been looking at World of Warcraft a lot more with all the information that's coming about their new expansion. I mean, anyone who's on YouTube watching gaming stuff, you watch the World of Warcraft stuff when it comes out. And they have the mythic dungeons now, which are very much like Fractals of the Mist. I wouldn't be surprised if the developers, didn't get their ideas, or I would be surprised if they didn't get their ideas from Guild Wars 2 and the Fractals, and the ability to change the content's level. I mean, there's a lot of games that do it now. WildStar has it as well, obviously, where you can change the prime level of the dungeon, and a lot of games have it. And the whole exciting part is that eventually the levels are going to get harder and harder and harder. And with Guild Wars 2, we've kind of hit this cap of difficulty, and apart from challenge modes, we haven't really gone far. Now, the other issue, obviously, is with challenge modes. If we do increase the difficulty of the actual base fractal, how do those work in? I mean, the challenge modes kind of assume that you've hit the level 100, and after that, it's not going to get any more difficult unless you add the challenge mode. So I don't know if, you could have the fractals scale keep going up, and then also have the challenge mode just always be applicable as well. So even the challenge mode would keep scaling up. That could be a very interesting way to do things. I don't know how feasible it is. Or if you just have it so that the challenge mode is just available at the highest tier of the fractal, and that's how it always is as well, might be a very good way of doing it. Or if they do rework the entire system and remove challenge modes, but make it so that the scales keep on going up, and a lot of those, big changes in the challenge modes are activated at different fractal levels, that could be a good way, and it sort of gradually blends into the challenge mode itself. So these are some of the ways I would think that they could go about doing it. I honestly don't know if that's going to be feasible or if that's even a goal for them. I think that's a big question that a lot of people have now with how long. I mean, it really only took an extra 2 weeks for this episode to come out. It was kind of unfortunate that it took those 2 weeks, and then in addition to that, there was a fair bit of bugs at launch still. But let's be honest, they've been pretty good for bugs in the last few episodes. And in terms of launching stuff on a regular schedule, they've been really good for the last 2 years even. So I don't think we can get that upset about things. The big thing, though, is this content enough every 3 months? Is it enough to add a new map? Because it's become very predictable what they add. I'm actually just going to listen to this.
I can fix this.
No, you can't, Kay. There's only one way to save me now.
The light of Deldrimor. But I don't have it. You have to do it. Please, make it quick.
Sorry for that abrupt change, but I just wanted to listen to that because I do think there's going to be a follow-up to the story in another fractal, which is also pretty exciting. But yeah, you guys leave comments in the section below. Do you think that this is enough content every 3 months? Do you think it's exciting knowing that we're going to get a new map, a new story instance? Obviously, the big surprise was the new mount here, and that is great to see that they're throwing things like that in there. But I don't know. I specifically think they should start releasing things off of the 3 months. Like if the fractal's ready, a month ahead, do that. Don't wait for these sort of triple releases, these double releases. I think that it was a lot better when we had the releases when they were ready. So guys, thanks for watching. I'll come back with some more content soon. and hopefully I'll be a lot more energetic when I start sleeping properly.